Three, two, and one. Well, welcome again to another segment of our project management teaching. In fact, moving on to our second, that's our second part, second focus, which is going to be project scope and time management. I hope you guys are all doing well so far, and we will be chatting next week live. Just remember that we will be doing those hangout sessions so we can answer your summatives back and forth and just get a good feel as to where you are and how you're doing. Okay, so I'm going to be jumping back and forth today on a couple of documents here and presentations. I want to first actually start by just kind of recapping as to what we did last time in terms of the community center. I've actually posted this up onto the classroom so you can go have a look. Where we were brainstorming ideas, as to why a community center was important for a particular area, and in class we discussed how it will definitely help the youth out in certain areas, whichever ones you picked. Definitely, a lot of kids that are, maybe not going to school, not attending school, could take part in sports and recreation, and it would, also include classes that would, encourage skills development, and so on and so forth. So, just to give you a bit of a rundown as to, here's a good example, was to first contextualize why the community hall was very important, and why I'm just revising this is for you to understand that, for you to just go on your own and try and some examples as to how we could expand on this in terms of scope management. This is why we're just going to kind of just quickly go through this, and move forward. So again, just back to just the definitions as to why I want to start a community center. Again, just about uplifting their community, giving it a bit of a place, to hold, private events, weddings, 21st or birthdays, or a town, almost like a town hall, where people could go and have meetings there, or community meetings, whatever it may be. So, again, I have included this document up on the classroom, and it is a nice, concise look at being able to understand the principles of what we want to do. And also just it's about wrapping your head around the scope, and that is the big word for the day: understanding scope. And what I said to you in the previous classes was that scope is a kind of a mini verse as to where your projects need to exist. The moment we go out of scope is the moment that we're going to go into a bit of an exact, not a bit of an exact spiral, and that means we have an endless, an endless project with no end time to it, and it becomes obviously costly. It becomes just futile to do it as well, and so we move from being able to decide where the beginning, middle, and end of what we want, for any particular project, any venture that we do forward. So again, I'm not going to go through the rundown of the policies again. You can go check that out. I have posted it there, but it does kind of put us in the right mind space. And for you, I want you to go back, in your own free time, and just see, how can I apply this, moving forward to a work breakdown structure, which again I'll explain towards the end of this lesson. But really defining the scope first and foremost. Okay. All right. So let's start with the presentation here, and we are going to, again, I'm gonna jumping back and forth between different presentations because I have examples that I want to go through, and I've got case studies But in the outcomes for this lesson, we are going to be looking at planning. So we want to be able to refine the scope statement from what we've decided to, you know, obviously, like, am I saying, from project charter? There, I lost my words for there for a second. Apologies. Let me move on. So, project charter, which was defined again as in previous lessons that I saw you. A project charter was a kind of a simple statement that's a very high level. A description of our risks, our high level outcomes, our deliverables, and what was most important about that charter was that we had sign off from our client. So that will lead us to the next, obviously our next step in the project management plan, which I will cover again a little bit later on in this session, which is now this project planning. Yes, to refine the scope statement, and then we'll learn about decomposing into a work breakdown structure a bit later. As you see the next point there, exactly what I've just mentioned, being able to take each deliverable and break that down into work packages and then into, well, actually subtasks, then work packages. Really looking at our strategy and saying, look, everything is better done in paper, but as we structure it in our documentation, we want to be able to have a very distinct instructive to our stakeholders and our team to move forward with our schedule. We will look at calculations, not in this particular lesson, but in the units to follow, where we look at resource estimations, confirmations. We do want that go ahead as well, and the go ahead is obviously um, what's confirmed by putting together a resource work and our manpower, which is actually part of that resource schedule, and then putting everything together, which again will be done in a number of lessons. So let's start off slow and move along, which is starting very directly at the preliminary scope statement. So what is this? This is almost a it's like a dry, I would describe it as a dry run for our actual scope statement, where in the preliminary scope statement, we would have to go and consult with expert professionals in whatever project we're dealing with. If it's got to do with software and IT development, or whether it is in a media activation, or whether it is in a sub project having to do with some kind of legal constitute, like a legal business constitution that we want to instate, we would have to go and look. We can't actually assume that the project manager and the team know enough. And also, that's a very big mistake to um, assume that you know enough about any project in any situation, at any time, in any context. We want to be able to make sure that we dot all our I's and cross all our T's by having a good understanding as to what we're trying to get into. So, again, we will be able to define those inputs through the brainstorming that we did, through the project charter that is defined, but then again, going to go and take a lot of time to understand what we're about to move into. And I'll show you some templates just a little bit later on. Okay. We do want to look at project requirements. So, from our project charter, it's very high level, and we want to start breaking it down in detail. I mentioned before, and I'll keep mentioning, is the moment you skip out a detail, is the moment that you'll be costing yourself both cost, time, and scope, and quality later on down the line, and that is a guarantee. So we will define those project requirements very extensively, and then proclaim a number of assumptions per requirement. So the assumptions will be based on what we think, and again, it is about a very educated guesstimation of certain things. For example, if we have and I think this is in your book as well, if we have a stakeholders meeting, we're assuming that those stakeholders will come to a consensus about a certain um, problem or situation or whatever it may be. So those types of assumptions we will state, excuse me, and that'll be per requirement. Then as well as a per requirement, I like to do this as well is again per requirement. Do an assumption, do all your assumptions, do all your constraints. Then as well, the very obvious ones are, for example, a time constraint. So we have to finish it by a certain date. Within your context, within your situation, you are printing and printing and delivering certain books before a school year. In in this very situation right now that we are globally, that might have been a little bit more different if we'd have this very severe situation maybe 3 months ago in South Africa. Would have definitely put down your constraints to your project of just delivering to your different schools and customers. But we look at our time constraints, for example. It's not to always say that time and cost constraints and scope constraints and quality constraints will always be interlinked and will always be stated. We might only have time and quality constraints, or time and scope constraints, or time and cost, vice versa with all of them. So we will look at that within the project requirements, and to just again do it very extensively, we would associate each requirement with an assumption, a constraint, and then move forward to define our principles and how these requirements, assumptions, constraints, and definitions will accomplish each of these project objectives. Okay. Then all this together will allow us to move into a scope statement. And I know that you are thinking, well, I mean, what does a scope statement look like? It's not exactly in my material. I'm going to show you again. I will also provide you with a template. And again, there's not a one size fits all, especially with all your documentation in project management. We look at templates. Everyone does it. Everyone around the world will look at a template and then decide to construct a hybrid that is of that particular template that applies to that specific project, again within the context and also within the business environment, the business miniverse, whatever that might imply, will then obviously filter down to your documentation itself. So back to the scope statement, it is a professional, concise, and again just a structured document of our predecessing tasks, our preliminary scope statements, our project requirements, putting that all together. Okay. So looking back at this scope statement, preliminary scope statement, as I mentioned before, it's developed from information that we gather from expert professionals, from whoever the initiator is, so the team that is initiating this particular project, the sponsor. So again, sponsor could be also your client. Again, so one and the same thing. It is an investigation process, and the investigation process again. I just repeat myself, has to be very concise. I'd rather, I'd rather lean towards being, having too much information than having too little information. You can always filter it down as you define your scope statement later on. But again, you have to define a strategy on how and who and when and what it is that you want to gather as part of your information for this preliminary scope statement, and then again go out, do it, revise the cycle if needs be, and move forward with that. Okay. So let us just look at a couple of constraints. And again, I mentioned assumptions earlier, requirements. Let's start with the requirements. So requirements management involves the continuous process of documenting, analyzing, tracing, prioritizing, and agreeing on requirements, which I know you can read there. But if we have to just kind of delve a little bit further into that, this is the sweet spot for project management. And when I say that, and documentation and concise documentation is the key to the key to the foundation of a successful project, right? Documenting does not stop, nor does the analyzing. Again, through the different phases, which again we'll see in just a moment, when looking at our monitoring process or phase within our project management lifespan, that is happening all the time throughout the different phases, just at a different capacity. And that draws back to this whole process of documenting and tracing and really understanding where it is and what it is that we're doing in a very concise, constructed, and structured manner. So I mentioned earlier about the assumptions, and there's an example here that says the weather will allow an outdoor operation at a certain date, which you know what, the weather is as unpredictable as we can possibly depend on. But if at the same time, if we are doing construction, for example, we know that if it's going to rain or if it's going to hail or whatever it may be, that weather is going to be a problem. We'd look at that as a risk, and a very possible risk, because it's a high probability depending on where we are in the country. For example, Cape Town is very different weather in winter than we do up here in Gauteng, for example. And we'd list that down as a good assumption, because we know what we're dealing with when it comes to seasonal change, and whether seasonal change has an impact on the particular project deliverables that we're trying to accomplish. Okay, so we'll have a number of different assumptions. Again, earlier I think I stated about stakeholders that might be deciding at certain points, with again certain deliverables. A stakeholder meeting would be, it would be held, and there would be a sign off, or there would be some kind of documentation, whatever it may be, that will complete that process. So we'd include a fair amount of assumptions. So just to set your mind at ease in your, just your approach to project management and the process of it, is that it is correct, 100% correct, to be able to guesstimate within a very knowledgeable and educated approach to what you are doing, because as you move along, you'll see that you might guesstimate. And I'm going a little bit off topic with assumptions, but just so that you can feel very comfortable in assumptions, is that you will guesstimate, for example, a time frame, but because life is life and things do happen, those time estimates will always, they will 80% of the time always change. And so we will have a foundation and get the word in just a moment, but we'll have a foundation um, as to where we plan the project, but then that'll obviously be just constantly revised and constantly dictated, or not so dictated, listen, dictate, communicated to our team as we move along. Okay, a baseline, that's the word I'm looking for. All right, so we'll develop a baseline, right? And then we'll have multitudes of baselines as we move along throughout our schedule, and that's very normal and it happens. Okay. So our project constraints, as mentioned before, and it's just a bit of a repeat of what I've already said, but as you can see there, it really is important to look at cost, time, scope, and then in class you'll remember that I did kind of the three-tier approach, right? Where they all influence one another. So cost, time, and scope will always have an effect on one another. But the fourth dimension, fourth tier, that they all affect both cost, time, and scope is quality. And so we had again this discussion in class where you can perform a project objective, which is developing maybe a product, okay, within cost, at the right time, and again, we could fulfill the requirements of the scope. But if that product, for example, is just of bad quality, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter whether you fell within the constraints, you operated within the constraints and restrictions of that particular project that you set out to do. So that's why I always say it's always your costs, again, your time and your scope that will have a direct, bi-directional effect on each other, and then all of those three will have an immediate effect on quality. Okay, let's move on. So, and there are several ways, several keys to follow in order to complete the scope statement. And I want to, from here, I'm just going to break out to an example. I spoke of templates earlier, and that is where every professional, every project manager does start off, is where do we have company templates that are available to us, or we might have to go and say procure or go and research that and get it somewhere else, online, from PMBOK, whatever it may be. We'd have templates for each one of our, each deliverable within our phases. But here in scope management, we would definitely have all these the project scope statements, templates available, and look there and start there, to give us a bit of direction as to where we want to move forward to. As discussed earlier, the preliminary scope statement is next. So we want to know the who, what, when, where, the how, and the why. That's really important to just do it's almost a rough draft, but don't take that literally in terms of it must be messy. It is still a formal document. It is still a business document, and it helps us understand, especially if we have people coming in and out of a project in a timeous manner, right? To be able to look and refer to documentation, and also the process of where the project is going, where it's been, and what it's busy doing at that very moment. So again, preliminary may infer that it is a bit of a draft, but it is still a formal statement. Okay, as mentioned again earlier, so we go and we gather some information. So we do talk to those expert professionals. They might be within our company. They might be again without, outside. Outside the say the infrastructure of our company, both the business infrastructure and the physical infrastructure, and we'd like to really become our own. You have to be a jack or Jill of all trades when you are a project manager. You go and you stand on the shoulders of geniuses, and what better way but to learn from an expert if you don't understand the particular environment or sub-environment of the project. Okay, so soliciting input. We solicit project input from the sponsor or the client to ensure a full understanding of what the client's needs and expectations are, and it is, every step is important, but this is really important because we are many projects fall into a situation where they don't define the client's needs and expectations properly. And again, what the client will do is, whether it's I say intentional or not intentional, they will use it to their advantage. So if it's vague definitions of expectations that are documented down, they will exploit um, your work and increase that scope until it spirals if you don't have it down on paper signed off. And I always say, like, if you have a massive project, so it might be a year up to 5 years is a bit ridiculous, but it does exist, does happen. Well, a multitude of sub projects that let's say if you are doing this for a client or externally, um, to your company, you would like that client to sign off, and so you would have an end date, and also a higher probability of success in that particular sub project for the bigger project at hand. So really defining those needs and expectations is super important, and they really have to be clear. And if you don't know, just before that sign off does actually happen, um, we do going to go and ask, and ask again and ask again to make sure that we do have all those, again, I'm using the same statement, but T's crossed and I's dotted. Okay. So our formal scope statement then is born. It's wonderful. So we refine the preliminary scope statement, and what we do is we add the documentation that I was mentioning before, that all our steps in moving towards the scope statement will still be formalized, even though it might seem like an informal process. And we will add to that a date and time, a date and a title to the statement, and just to again be able to move forward to the next phase. There you see the client acceptance, as I mentioned before, very important. I went a little bit ahead there, but I couldn't stress that more. So that the client acceptance is gold, and then we would move on to our statement updates. If any revisions, again, I just mentioned this earlier, would go back to the client to understand, listen, if there is a misunderstanding in terms of what needs to be done for our project, then we'll go and revise that, and then make sure that those revisions, we don't go and discard our previous versions of this of our scope statement. We add to it and get the sign off and move on from there. Okay. Before I get there, I want to show you like a nice example, a couple of nice examples. So just bear with me so you can see exactly what this looks like. So here's a hard copy example, and I'll show you a template in just a moment. So for example, there is it's the first part of the scope statement, where they're building software for a timesheet reporting tool. It states the project manager's name there, and the reason for why this particular project is being created, or it's being put into action. The timesheet reporting tool will be the creation of a user-friendly web-based application. The application will automate the process of tracking the daily time entries made by each employee. So what happens from our scope description is that it will give a light. Obviously, in your situation, we'd like a little more detail, much more detail, as much as you can. But in this case, it's quite small and simple. We want to be able to, in the following steps, understand what is out of scope, which means it might be part of a subsequent project, whatever is out of scope, and what is within scope, according to our description, our objective, our high level requirements, and then again defining those in scope and out scope um, boundaries. Okay, so just to quickly look at some points there, where we have the scope, description, and objectives, defining exactly the functionality of this piece of software, which is to track the time a timesheet for all the IT employees. If we look at some high-level requirements, an example there would be an admin access to support to support this team, a user access for the tool granted to all employees, and really what I want to focus on here is the in scope and out of scope. So, an example of in scope, which means it needs to be done, is like a timesheet task addition to the tool will be accessed by admin users, or a copy previous week timesheet feature must be included, and so on and so forth. It's okay. If it doesn't quite hit home for you, you're not busy doing programming. So it's just as an example, but more importantly, you can understand what would be in and out of scope by looking at a really good example is that role-based task list template, where that would fall out of scope because it is definitely not a part of the functionality of this particular software that they're developing, and this could be software that is added on to current software. There's so many interpretations to this. Another good example there is access the tool via mobile and tablet. So that is a subsequent project and maybe an added value. Um, I mean, that's so clear, like night and day, to know that, listen, if we want to develop a mobile app for this, so what would, we want to get the app first done, and the application software done first, see its functionality implemented, executed, see obviously the success lessons learned, and obviously any constraints that and for downfalls of it, and then move over to another project, which would be developing this for a mobile application. Okay. Uh, excuse me. So this is just to give you an idea as to where we're moving to with what we've discussed, and it's going to be a bit of a back and forth as I move back into the 5 project management phases. But I'll come back to this in a later lesson, because I think it's a really great um, revision of what we're doing here, where we start with the project charter. And we have a stakeholder register. This again, it doesn't need to happen, but that would give us our high level requirements like we saw in the previous example. From there, we discussed extending some assumptions. We would have the constraints, as you mentioned before, and we would definitely have the deliverables that were defined from the baseline of our project charter, and again, whatever our stakeholders might have inputted as the in scope and out of scope would add to all those particular inputs. We would define detailed requirements, and then in a completely different class that we're going to have, we will do a requirements traceability matrix, also a responsibility matrix. Also going to do a risk matrix as well. But we would then slowly start to define the scope and move to what we are trying to do and trying to wrap our heads around today, which is defining that project scope statement, okay, which will have our major deliverables. We'll look at decomposition, which means breaking down everything, every major deliverable into the lowest tier or level that defines a task, that it has a cost. It will have manpower, and again, it will have consumables, whatever it may be. These are how we will define our work breakdown structure and our work breakdown structure dictionary. Okay, so I'm going to show you an example of the WBS towards the end of this lesson. But I want to, as I said, I'm going to move back and forth between a variety of documents here. This document will be made available to you. And here, where I spoke about this project charter, and it's a brief that brief document that starts the project off just before scope management happens. We define project initiation and then planning. The project charter will define the overview. See there, a date, sponsor, team leader, just as you saw in the example there. This will be supplied again to you, as I said. Key objectives, very important. The problem statement, how great is that? I get excited about stupid things, I know. But definitely allows us to immediately understand with the client or whoever this project is, it's created for, understand where it is that the project begins. Okay, why did we decide on taking this route specifically? Then there are, again, as mentioned before, the template does include critical assumptions and constraints, a bit of a budget, some milestones for us, a sign off. You see that sign off is very important, and if there are any other concerns that we would like to point out at the beginning of our project charter, we would put that in the other section. You don't need to have that. Again, you would customize this to your own situation. Okay. Again, this document's really nice. It'll take you through a nice, very concise and step-by-step process, understanding how we would define like a scope statement, what our goals and missions are. A very nice structure. I really didn't go to a lot of effort to find something like this, like in the sense that I'm saying that to make you feel more comfortable that there are so many resources out there that help you understand how to build your documentation moving forward. Okay. All right. So let's go back to our initial presentation. Okay. And we are looking at something that we did discuss in the first class, but I'm going to just revise it here because it is within your material at this point, and so it's not nothing new. It's just a little bit of a revision for you at this point. Okay, so our first out of the 5 phases in our project management life cycle was our project conception and initiation, where things like our project charter would appear. So why is it that this is happening? Again, get the sign off so we can move ahead. The project definition and the planning is what we are busy with right now, and we will be busy with for the next 2 weeks. Defining very clearly the time and the scope of what it is that this project entails. We will move to project execution, so the actual implementation of what it is that we are doing, again, involving literally everyone from our, like I say, our procured stakeholders, to our internal team, to our board members or our sponsors. All of that comes into a high capacity involvement within project launching and our project execution. The performance and control is put in as a fourth phase, but does happen throughout the entire project management life cycle. And you're wondering why put it there, and it does belong somewhere, which is a bit of a cop out statement if you take it at face value. But it's it is there will be a very small capacity of project performance and control monitoring happening in the first phase, which is our conception and initiation. It will start to increase around our planning, but then be at a very high scale, very high intensity through our launch and execution, as well as through our project closure. We do put it in as a fourth phase, but it is a phase that is say it exists in all the other phases of the life cycle itself. As I said to you previously, that we do have a 4-phase life cycle, which doesn't include the performance and control. It is actually what you see A, B, C, and then an E, a 5, a 7, a 9 stage life cycle. So there is again many variations of this moving forward. Okay. So if we look at just what kind of discipline is required in project management itself, we have to, as a project manager, you have to be a particular type of person with a particular type of soft and hard skill set. We want someone who's able to, encourage stakeholder consensus, but also make sure that the stakeholders are comfortable, so that all their requirements and their needs are met at all times. If we look at the other end, of others, a stakeholder again, kind of might infer a top level, but everyone that is involved in a project is a stakeholder. But we do look at a stakeholder from a top-down approach, and we look at the people that are affected money-wise, and obviously in terms of however productivity is going to be influenced at the outcome of a particular project or this project that you're dealing with. We're looking at making sure that the stakeholder is constantly invested in, and we can only encourage investment through again that high quality of productivity, and whether you are meeting the deliverables that are sold, say, and say devoted to, committed to. Okay, so we want to be able to stimulate team collaboration, creating our long-term and our short-term plans for the project. So no one is saying that your projects will be always short-term projects. They may involve very very long term. I say they're like a 5 or a 3 year, even a 1 year, depending on its complexity, is considered to be a long term project that will involve a number of short term plans or short term projects. So we want to make sure that also the right team members are collaborating. Yes. In obviously a very productive manner, but also productivity has to very strongly it strongly has to do with uh, their their absence, and then obviously their presence. And by that I mean, as a project manager, as you move to planning and scope, when I say your scheduling and obviously our resource assignments, right? We would like the right people at doing the right things at the right time. So we don't really want people, hanging around and doing quote unquote nothing at certain times of the project. It does one, it obviously costs you, and it's a waste of money, and you also it will definitely affect your team quote unquote morale. Okay. So focusing that the team will continually deliver tested, I would say software in this case, but I would say outcomes for our stakeholder evaluation on a consistent and a continuous level manner. We want to also help and create an effective working environment. Very important. We discussed, in the previous lesson, just concepts like stereotyping and how that affects team morale, but also just ethically how that is not something that you really want to ever go down that path. But we have to look at it also proactively as well. So how do we proactively make sure that the productivity of our team is one maximized, but also continuously maximized to be effective? Okay, so then we want to keep stakeholders and the team informed on project process. So this is, I mean, it is self-explanatory, but let me explain a little bit further. Um, someone is invested when they are informed, and that is, it also gives me an immediate sense of accountability and value. If the word is valuability, but I'm valuable because I am part of a particular part, or all parts, or some parts, or these parts of our project progress, right? Um, it is, it has so many other advantages to just, it's just then just, being informative. We also want to kind of avoid a situation where, because a team is a team members or stakeholders are not informed on particular parts of a project, they will cause some kind of risk that is defined via a high probability and high impact risk based just purely on miscommunication or no communication of our project information progress moving forward. So want to do that, and that's a good thing to keep in mind. Want to provide a framework to manage project risk and continually adapt to change. So just keep that in mind for the moment right now, because that is something that we will give you the tools and the skills to um, be able to continuously, like I said, that we're going to monitor this project on an ongoing basis. How do we do that? I mean, who do we report to? We have risk management, but how do we implore it? Across across the project management life cycle. Who do we involve? When do we involve it? How often do we reanalyze those risks or mitigate those risks? So just keep it in the back of your mind. We will give you those tools in classes and lessons to follow. Okay. So, what can we expect, or we can expect the following results due to product-based planning. So, what is just to give you just a bit of a understanding of our product-based planning. Essentially, essentially everything is can be considered product-based planning. So, if we are looking at deliverables, and deliverable is something you can see, touch, in the business context, feel, touch, smell, those, all the senses. We are looking at a product, right? So we want to know that as our end game or our end result, we're looking at necessary products that are identified and that they are captured in our documentation, and also again to give us a direction as to where we want to go. Product breakdown structure is identified, then repeatedly refined until all the requisite products are fully identified. So that means again, and if I've mentioned this already, is that top-down approach where we have, we have a first level tier, which is the product or the slash project, a project that might deliver a particular product, and then we will have different tiers that are weighed down and defined downwards to really compartmentalize as well, decompose the different substages or subphases, work work uh, work packaging for defining this particular um, uh, top tier product. So we want to also look at intermediate documentary products that are essential to work of delivering the projects that are identified, and products that are required to manage the project to ensure quality check on earlier made products that are also identified. So just again to, that almost kind of, if I read it just word for word, doesn't reign quite clear, but it is just going back to that whole essence of being able to uh, do quality assurance and quality management through monitoring and controlling through various phases of this particular project or product plan. Okay. Let us move to, excuse me, just some approaches, and I really want to put focus on um, uh, certain ways that we can spread deliverables within a project. So there's we can deliver we can spread deliverables across project phases. Like I explained to you, we can have a planning, initiation, and execution, etc., phase, right? We could also do it, spread our deliverables across our knowledge areas. So within a particular project, we might decide to have a knowledge area like a legal or uh, a production line or a factory line or whatever it may be, a knowledge area. So production is actually what I want to say there. We I always like to uh, push the first of these five ways that we can manage these deliverables, which is the project phases. And then once you have a little bit more experience within project management and the life cycle itself, you can start working with sub projects, and there's spreading deliverables across different processes, and organizing it from major deliverables to sub deliverables, as I was saying before, where we have multiple, massive, big, big scope project, and that is uh, uh, very tangibly and very effectively accomplished through a mass amount of sub projects, and then those into sub deliverables, and so on and so forth. Okay. Is the project complete? Once the project deliverable has been broken down, the project manager will need to ensure that explicit goals are attained before rendering the project complete. So this is literally just a repetition of what I've said to you before, where it is to err on the side of being safe, in accomplishing success of a project is, imagine yourself towards the end, or at the end, should I say. and ticking off all the boxes that you have stated within the project charter and the scope statement that again define just the inputs and the outputs for why this particular project goal would be considered a success. And then we know it is also done as well. Um, uh, Again, like I sound like a broken telephone, but it so many projects have failed because the scope was too broad. It was too broad and not, like I say, subdivided into different scopes. Different projects with a very clear goal and completion, a goal to completion. So that is very important to keep in mind. Okay. Just on our last slide here, a couple of things to take note of, and this is going to make a little bit more sense when we look at our work breakdown structure and the dictionary. We want to as the work breakdown structure, which I'll show you a couple of examples in just a moment, is taking the scope statement and then being able to break it down into deliverables and then tasks. So from those tasks, they can, as I've said earlier, but I want to say it again, uh, they're broken down to a variable amount of subtasks and work packages, right? And those levels can vary, as you'll see again in the examples. Each one of these will allow us to then move into our Gantt chart, which is going to which will be a scheduling diagram, a scheduling tool, and then with the work breakdown structure, we have a dictionary that accompanies it, and the dictionary is very extensive in terms of explaining what each one of these work packages or these deliverables entail when it comes to one. Obviously, identifying the actual component itself, stating the start and end date, stating which resources will be allocated towards that particular work package or that particular deliverable, estimated costs for each one of those subdivisions, um, charging their numbers, contract information details and requirements, which I think is also quite self-explanatory in terms of like so who are in terms of who is responsible, how can we get in contact with them, and what is required from them. And a quality control protocol, I like that. Requirements and standards. I keep saying that I enjoy quality. Obviously, everyone enjoys quality, but how that is enforced per like I say component of the work breakdown structure, and then any technical information that might be necessary for proper performance or should I say, of the work. This is going to make a lot more sense now when I show you an example. Let me show you an example over here, which this one is in your book, okay, where they use we'll use numbering to to describe a process, okay, and a deliverable. So on the right hand side, you'll see an example of a radio project. So this is for a radio communications project. And then in the second tier, you will see what the deliverables will be. So in our second tier will always be deliverables. With a work breakdown structure, it doesn't have to be in order, which might seem a little bit illogical at first, but we decide on order and dependability and with all these all the following components within our Gantt chart and our scheduling. So if you look again back to the second tier, that'll be our deliverables, which is system design, our transmitter, receiver, antenna. And if we go down the transmitter side of this hierarchy, right, you'll see that there'll be a request to obviously build a modulator, and underneath that a transformer. And to build a transformer, we'll have our work packages, which is our lowest level. We call our lowest level of a work breakdown structure, including things like clamps and terminal blocks. And I'm not going to pretend like I know what I'm saying here, because I have never built like a radio communicator, but the concept I think is understandable. Here is another example of, and I'm not going to go through the entire thing, but it's just so that you can get a feel for how the work breakdown structures will look. So there's a library management system, and there's quite instinctively you will put it in order. You will put the deliverables, which is the planning, the execution control, and the closeout, in order. Even though I did say before, which it still stands correct, that it doesn't have to be in order. Most people will just logically put it as our planning, execution control, closeout, for example, in this example here. But as you see, the work packages are broken down, and you see the numbering is very important, because once it gets, because your projects are not going to be this small, they're going to be quite large, and they're going to be quite detailed. So we'd use the numbering system and the WBS dictionary to be able to define the detail for each one of these tasks that need to be accomplished or finished or completed, right? So if we just look at the planning and look at the first couple, there's we're going to develop a work breakdown structure. We develop a project schedule, develop a resource plan, so on and so forth in the planning. I want you to just have a look at in execution control 1.2.2 in support searching e-resources. There are sub tasks or sub work packages that support like our 1.2.2.2 support searching e-thesis, and our support searching e-journals at 1.2.2.1. Now you'll notice that we have to do it. It's from the bottom up. That's very important. So look at that that substructure. Okay, and how it's been numbered there at 1.2.2.1 and then 1.2.2.2. So we might, in a situation like this, like I would take this and I would be able to do both activities at the same time if I had multiple manpower resources. I suppose the direction actually doesn't really count. So it's a little bit confusing in the sense that there aren't more breakdowns. But for example, like I say here, I would put those two tasks running at the very same time, with the same manpower resources. Here's another example, and again, one that might include a little bit more detail. For example, who might be responsible, and maybe a little bit detail in terms of like monetary. So there's a project there that is a ventilate to build a ventilation system, and the project manager is Dad with a budget of $400. So the deliverable, as you can see there, is once again, so we want to add ventilation to the bathroom. We want to add vent to the outside wall in task 1. And just to look downwards, you will see that who is responsible. Dad seems to be responsible in most sections there, except in task 3, where we have responsibility move over to Mom, and task 4, installing the fan switch, is moved over to an electrician. As you see downwards, there are examples of where maybe the budget might go. And again, 3 very different examples, but it's for you to understand just the structure of the WBS as opposed to the detail. The detail I would really leave, and I'll put this up as an example. I just want to go to, where is this? this work breakdown structure, right? So the work breakdown structure dictionary, where it's this is an example of and ours will be a lot more detailed, but it gives you the breakdown in terms of the code of the task or the deliverable that is within the diagram itself. Then we put the element name there, the definition, so full description of, and then we have who is responsible for it. So the WBS dictionary becomes quite extensive and very useful, obviously, without having to state the obvious, to defining our project uh, very accurately and moving forward in terms of scope. Okay, so I'm going to leave it at that for now, and I'm going to put supplementary material for you. I hope that was helpful, and we will do a bit of a discussion when I see you.